Cary Ann Medlin was born on October 9, 1970, to parents Charlotte and Jerry. In 1979, 8-year-old Cary, a student at Martin Elementary School, was living in Greenfield, Tennessee, with her mother, stepfather, and stepbrother. Her stepfather worked at the Goodyear tire plant in Union City, and her mother was a nurse at Jackson Hospital. On Labor Day weekend, September 1, 1979, Cary and her stepbrother were riding their bicycles in the neighborhood near their home when a man pulled up next to them in a Gran Torino. He struck up a conversation and began acting like he knew their father and needed directions to his house. So Cary got in his car to show him the way. After getting in, she was sadly never seen alive again. Her family, friends, and neighbors joined together in a massive search for her, and 2 days later, her body was found. An autopsy revealed that she had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. Shortly after the murder, a man named Robert Glenn Coe, who had a long history of drug abuse, crimes, and mental health issues, told his family that he had killed someone, but they didn't initially believe him. Once they realized he was serious, they agreed to help him get out of town and subsequently bought him a bus ticket to Georgia. Meanwhile, one family member called and notified the police. Police were thankfully able to get to the bus station before he left and took him into custody. After being arrested, Coe confessed to the murder and described the day in detail. He said that on Saturday, September 1, 1979, he was out getting parts for the Carroll County Collision Body Shop where he worked when he got the urge to flash someone. Unable to find anyone, he returned to work and finished his shift. Later on, still in the mood to flash someone, he drove around Greenfield in his 1972 Ford Torino until he saw Cary and her stepbrother. He then convinced her to leave her bicycle at a nearby church and get in the car with him to go see her stepfather. Her brother, on the other hand, was left behind at the church to watch the bicycles. The only time Cary spoke was when she noticed he wasn't going the right way. He said she asked him where they were going, and he responded that they were going for a ride. After that, he said she hung her head down and never said another word. He continued driving around until he found a secluded place to park. Once parked, he sexually assaulted her. After he was done, she kept telling him that Jesus loved him, which angered him, so he jerked her out of the car and tried to choke her. When that didn't work, he stabbed her to death. After leaving, he threw the knife out of the car window and drove to a family member's home to look for his wife, but she wasn't there. As he continued driving around looking for her, he realized he left footprints behind, so he took off his flip-flops and threw those out as well. 2 days later, Coe dyed his hair dark black and traded in his 1972 Ford Torino for a 1972 Mustang at Crestview Motor in Gleason. He told his wife that he had changed his hair color because he had stabbed a state trooper in Camden. He then explained that he needed to get out of town, so they took him to the bus station in Huntington, where he planned to travel under the name James Watson. However, before his 1981 trial, Coe recanted his confession, and his defense attorney had him plead insanity. During the trial, Coe lost his cool and cursed and spat at the prosecutors. So he was gagged and removed from the courtroom to watch the remainder of the trial from a television in another room. In the end, he was convicted and sentenced to death. 21 years later, on April 19, 2000, he was executed in Nashville, Tennessee by lethal injection. It's also of note that he was the first inmate to be executed in the state in 40 years. Surprisingly, 30 of his family and friends showed up to celebrate his life, the life of a man convicted of sexually assaulting and murdering a child. Deshaun Martinez was unfortunately born in a nightmare by his parents, Anthony and Elizabeth, in 2015. In 2020, he and his parents, along with his 3 siblings and grandmother, Ann Martinez, were living in Flagstaff, Arizona. His parents were druggies and would keep Deshaun and his 7-year-old brother in a 21 by 25-inch closet for roughly 16 hours a day. Inside the closet, all they had to sleep on was an orange piece of plastic on the floor. In 2013, before Deshaun was born, his parents were investigated by DCS after they received 2 different allegations of abuse towards one of their other children. However, DCS closed the case and said the claims were unsubstantiated. In March of 2020, Deshaun's grandmother, Ann, called 911 to report that one of the children was unresponsive inside the apartment. When emergency responders arrived, they found Deshaun dead from severe starvation. His parents tried to say that Deshaun was malnourished due to a medical condition and that he died after stealing and taking their diet and caffeine pills. At the time of Deshaun's death, he weighed only 34 pounds and had non-life-threatening abrasions and bruises all over his body. Deshaun's 7-year-old brother, whom he shared the closet with, was rushed to the Flagstaff Medical Center, while the two youngest children, 2 girls ages 2 and 4, were removed from the home and placed in the custody of DCS. Strangely, the 2 girls were not malnourished at all. As for Deshaun, his parents kept lying, saying that despite feeding him a lot, he would not gain weight. They also claimed that they were on a budget and waiting on food stamps. Eventually, they confessed that the boys were kept in a locked closet and were given very little to eat as punishment for stealing food at night. They were kept in the closet every day from 8 p.m. to 12 p.m. the next day, when they were allowed to eat oatmeal. 4 hours later, they would be given a cheese sandwich. In the end, all 3 adults in the home, Elizabeth, Anthony, and Ann, were charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and child abuse. Elizabeth had been addicted to meth from birth and had a very traumatic upbringing and suffered severe mental issues. It wasn't helped by her husband Anthony and his mother Ann, who she said inflicted physical and emotional abuse toward her on a daily basis. She even told her attorney that she felt more free in prison than she ever did with Anthony. In the end, she was sentenced to life in prison. The children were eventually placed in a foster family. Their foster mother said that Deshaun's brother was so traumatized about food and eating that he would ask every 5 minutes when the next meal was. He also kept a special little lunchbox with snacks in it by his side at all times. As for their sisters, they are also doing better, but it took 3 years for one of them to speak. As for Anthony and Ann, they remain in jail awaiting trial. Jacqueline Hartenstein Lard was born to parents Charles and Rebecca Hartenstein on June 23, 1946, in Maryland. In 1986, 40-year-old Jacqueline, a mother of 2, was living in Stafford County, Virginia, and was married to Ronald Lard, a DEA employee. On November 14, 1986, Jacqueline was working late at the Mount Vernon Realty with another female coworker. Around 9 p.m., they decided to head home, and Jacqueline told her coworker, and I quote, "I'm gathering my stuff, I'll be right behind you." Sadly, she would never make it home that night. The following morning, when employees showed up to the office, they found blood in the hallway near the back door to their office. However, Jacqueline and her vehicle were both missing. Police and the FBI knew they had a missing person and collected the blood and other evidence from the scene. One day later, some teenagers walking through a wooded area off Route 1 in Woodbridge, Virginia, about 20 miles north of the Realty office, found Jacqueline's partially clothed body underneath a pile of discarded carpet. A month after her murder, on December 18, 1986, her 1986 Nissan was discovered abandoned 25 miles away at Bryn Mawr apartment in Alexandria, Virginia. Her husband, Ronald, was immediately ruled out because he was out of the country at the time of her murder. Over the years, the FBI ruled out multiple suspects and persons of interest, and even released a sketch of a man they wanted to question about the murder. The sketch was created based on information provided by 2 witnesses who said that on the weekend of Jacqueline's murder, they saw a man who they described as being 6 feet tall, in his mid-20s, heavy-set with acne scars in the vicinity of where her body was found. While they didn't believe the man was a suspect in the case, they did say he fit the profile of the killer. Investigators said that while the murderer went to great lengths to remove incriminating evidence from the scene, including fingerprints and hair, not all was removed, including an impression of the man's sneakers. Unfortunately, since the case was most likely a crime of opportunity, it made solving it even more difficult. Thankfully, they were able to retrieve DNA evidence, but over the years, searches in the CODIS database turned up no results. 3 years after her murder, on March 29, 1989, 18-year-old Amy Baker of Stafford, Virginia, was visiting family in Falls Church. She started her drive back home around 8:30 p.m., but would sadly never make it. Around 9:55 p.m. that same night, a Virginia state trooper discovered Amy's blue Volkswagen Beetle abandoned on the side of the road. The following day, when the car was still there, the trooper had it towed. When Amy's mother learned about the car being towed, she went and searched inside and found her daughter's belongings. 2 days after Amy's disappearance, her family searched the area where the car was found and sadly found Amy's body in a wooded area near the Backlick Road exit on I-95 in Springfield. Investigators determined that she had run out of gas on the exit ramp and began walking to a gas station when she encountered her killer. She was then sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Unfortunately, just like Jacqueline's case, it would remain unsolved for years. In 2021, investigators had the DNA sent to Parabon Nanolabs, and a DNA profile was created. When the profile was uploaded to the Virginia State Database, it revealed that the same man had murdered both Amy and Jacqueline. On December 14, 2023, with the use of genetic genealogy and investigative work, the suspect was identified as 65-year-old Elroy Neal Harrison. He was then indicted for first-degree murder, abduction with the intent to defile, and aggravated malicious wounding of Jacqueline, as well as breaking and entering with the intent to commit murder. He was arrested at his home the following day. He is currently awaiting trial for Jacqueline's murder, but hasn't been charged in Amy's case yet. Irma Sipple was born on August 27, 1945, in Denver, Colorado. In 1946, 10-month-old Irma was living in Tennessee with her toddler brother and her mother Alma in a one-room apartment. One day, a woman from the Tennessee Children's Home Society came to the apartment and said she was investigating alleged child abuse involving a neighbor. The woman had strangely pulled up in a black limousine, and upon seeing baby Irma and her runny nose, she asked, "Your baby's sick, isn't she? You should get her a checkup." Since the woman didn't have any money, the woman, who identified herself as Georgia Tan, offered to take Irma to the Memphis General Hospital. Alma agreed, and all she had to do was sign some paperwork. After signing the paperwork, to Alma's shock, Georgia took Irma and told her she couldn't come along. The following day, Alma went down to the hospital and saw Irma, who was feeling much better. However, to her shock, when she asked to take her home, the nurse told her that all the children belonged to the Children's Home Society. Alma left and began calling Georgia. When Georgia finally returned her call, she told her that Irma had died of pneumonia. Alma at least wanted her daughter so she could bury her, but she was told that Irma had already been buried. Alma would spend the next 44 years believing her daughter was dead, until one night when she was watching Unsolved Mysteries and a story came on about thousands of children who had been kidnapped and the organization that was trying to help reconnect the children with their parents. On a hunch, Alma called the number, and 7 months later, she was reunited with Irma. Irma was now an adult living in Cincinnati, and her foster family renamed her Sandra Kimbrell, and she went by Sandy. Sandy graduated with an associate's degree in nursing in 1975 and worked a long career at Cincinnati Children's Hospital as a perioperative nurse in the cardiology unit. She then worked in nurse management at the Jewish Hospital in Cincinnati before moving to York, Pennsylvania in 1991. There, she worked at the Hershey Medical Center and Memorial Hospital. After retiring in 2006, she moved back to her hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio. She sadly died in 2022 at the age of 76, and her obituary read, "Sandy was born on August 27, 1945 in Denver, Colorado, to Snow and Frances Smart." I'm not sure why it wasn't updated to include her birth mother, Alma Sipple. As for Georgia Tan, she was responsible for kidnapping an estimated 5,000 children. Georgia was born on July 18, 1891, in Philadelphia, Mississippi, to Beulah and George Clark Tan, and had a 3-year-old brother, Rob Roy Tan. Her father, George, was a district court judge and really wanted his daughter to become a concert pianist. So from the age of 5, he put her in piano lessons. After high school, Georgia enrolled at Martha Washington College in Abingdon, Virginia, where she graduated in 1913 with a degree in music. The kicker was that she hated playing the piano and wanted to be an attorney like her father. Her father agreed to teach her, and she passed the state bar exam in Mississippi. However, he still wouldn't allow her to practice law. So she turned to social work and got a job with the Mississippi Children's Home Society, working as the receiving director at the Kate McWillie Powers Receiving Home for Children. Even though adoption at the time wasn't looked at favorably, Georgia felt differently, and in 1922, she adopted a baby girl and named her June. Around this time, she met Ann Atwood, who was 8 years younger than Georgia, and the two began secretly dating. In 1924, Georgia was terminated from the society for questionable child-placing methods. So she, along with June and Ann's baby boy Jack, moved to Memphis, Tennessee. Also around this time, Ann added the last name Hollingsworth to her name, most likely to give the impression she was widowed since giving birth out of wedlock was frowned upon. Once in Memphis, Georgia was hired as the executive secretary for the Tennessee Children's Home Society. It wasn't long before she weaseled herself to the top of the company, eventually becoming the head of the organization. This is when she began trafficking children. Just like the laws today, Tennessee had laws in place that forbade the selling of children and only allowed agencies to charge for their services. Today's adoption cost can range from $20,000 to $60,000 and more, but back then, the society typically charged $7. However, Georgia began taking children to New York and California and would charge as much as $700 for the adoption. The money was paid by check and not written out to the Tennessee Children's Home Society, but to Georgia herself. An estimated 3,000 children were adopted by parents in New York and California between 1940 and 1950. A lot of the families were very wealthy, and Georgia would get every penny out of them she could, such as charging for background checks that never happened or charging insane amounts for airline tickets. However, some of the children were sold to families to be used as child labor on farms. All the money she received was placed in a secret bank account under a false corporation. Most of the money she received she took for herself and didn't report it to the society or the IRS. While she was clearly selling children, the worst part was where the children were coming from. If you're going to run a scam, you have to have a good amount of product. Since adoption at the time wasn't looked at favorably, there weren't people lining up at the society's doors to give up their babies. So Georgia used illegal and unethical tactics to get the babies. Just like she did with Irma, she would dupe unsuspecting parents into turning custody over to her. It was basically the largest child kidnapping organization in the country, and children were disappearing from all over the place. Sometimes even entire groups of siblings would go missing while walking to or from school. Other times, she would take the children directly from the nursery schools, and parents would later be told welfare agents took their child. She would even take newborns and tell the birth mothers the child died. Most of the women she took babies from were single mothers who, at the time, couldn't fight back. In order to pull this off, she hired spotters who would watch around town for children that could be taken by the society. Sometimes they wouldn't even report back, but instead take the children right there on the spot from playgrounds and other locations. It wasn't helped that she had people in power on her payroll, such as the local judge Camille Kelly and politician E.H. Crump, aka the Boss, who was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives in Tennessee from 1931 to 1935 and then served on the Democratic National Committee until 1945. Once Georgia had the children in her custody, she would destroy their records in hopes that the birth families could never find them. Then new birth certificates were created with the support of Judge Camille Kelly. Judge Kelly would even have children removed from divorced mothers and hand them over to Georgia. Unfortunately, the children in Georgia's care were often mistreated physically and sexually, and sometimes even starved to death. These deaths put Memphis at the top of the nation's infant mortality rate. Hundreds of children who died were buried in unmarked graves with no death certificates. To help with the lack of housing, a businessman donated the mansion at 1556 Poplar Avenue to Georgia and the society. The bottom floor of the mansion was turned into offices and intake rooms, while the top floor was used as a nursery. However, Georgia continued to ignore doctors' recommendations and didn't provide the children with the necessary medicine when they were sick. To this day, the number of children who died in Georgia's care, or lack thereof, is unknown, but it's estimated to be around 500. By the 1940s, things were slowly crashing down. In 1941, the Child Welfare League of America dropped the Tennessee Society from its list of qualifying institutions. Then in 1950, politician E.H. Crump lost his power and Judge Camille Kelly was forced to resign. On September 11, 1950, the then governor of Tennessee, Gordon Browning, launched an investigation into the society after receiving reports that the agency was selling children for profit. 4 days later, Georgia died of uterine cancer. The Tennessee Children's Home Society was subsequently closed the same year. While New York and California vowed to correct the adoptions, nothing was ever done, and the estimated 5,000 children were left with their new families. E.H. Crump and Judge Camille Kelly were never charged, and Crump died in 1954 and Kelly died in 1955. As for her partner, Anne Atwood Hollingsworth, she lived until the age of 96 and died in 1995. Vickie Lynn Belk was born in Alexandria, Virginia, to parents Lonnie and Maydale Casey on March 20, 1951, and was the eldest of 6 siblings. She attended Minnie Howard Elementary School and then graduated from T.C. Williams High School in 1969. After high school, she enrolled at St. Augustine's University and became the first member of her family to graduate from college. In 1979, 28-year-old Vickie was working as a management analyst for the Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. She also had a 7-year-old son named Lamont. It seemed like she had everything going for her until August of 1979 when tragedy struck. On August 27th, Vickie and her boyfriend, James Hill, also an agriculture department employee, rode in his 1972 Buick from their apartment in Prince George's County to the Stadium Armory Station, where they left the car and took a train to work. However, at lunchtime, Vickie left and took the train back to the car so she could run some errands, with plans to pick James back up after work. However, when James arrived at the parking lot that evening, Vickie was nowhere to be found. He spent the night calling around to friends and family, but no one had seen her. The following day, he reported her missing. 2 days later, a teenager riding his bike along a path near Bryan's Road and Metropolitan Church Road in Charles County, Maryland, 25 miles south of D.C., found her body. Sadly, she had been sexually assaulted and shot to death. Thankfully, they were able to collect DNA, which helped solve the case 44 years later. In early 2022, the evidence was re-evaluated and her clothes were submitted for DNA testing. To the investigators' surprise, when it was uploaded to CODIS, a match was found and linked to 62-year-old Andre Taylor. Taylor was a few months shy of his 19th birthday when he abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered Vickie. He lived at his aunt's home, only 4 miles from where her body was found. Over the years, he amassed a long criminal record that consisted of violent crimes. In 1989, he was convicted for the murder of a man he fatally shot during a street robbery. After he was released, his crimes continued. When Taylor, now an amputee with one leg, was arrested and charged with her murder, he was living in a nursing home in D.C. Taylor remains in jail awaiting trial.